For today's conference, I'll be talking on the studio space and the lack of studio space of artist Frances Ann Johnston. And this paper coincides with my feminist recovery project on Frances Ann Johnston, which includes a provincially touring exhibition, which is on view right now, as well as a monograph of her work, which was recently launched. So painted by Frances Ann Johnston, this is titled Etude, which is inscribed on the cover of a green book within the work. As one of her larger canvases, it brings together her preferred motifs from open doors and windows to flowers and plants to still lifes of household objects. Accordingly, this work can be described as a self-portrait of Johnston's career and artistic pursuits. The title refers to her studious approach to painting as well as the setting, which depicts her first dedicated studio space. For most of her life, Johnston painted out of kitchens, gardens, and bedrooms while looking after the household, her artist husband, and their two daughters. But in the mid-1960s, following a move from Montreal to Toronto into a spacious home, Johnston finally obtained a room of her own, 30 years after she had begun painting. Following this, she had her first solo show in 1967 at Roberts Gallery, showcasing this work, and another in 1968 with more than 70 paintings produced over the course of a single year. So although her production increased after she acquired her own studio, Johnston had been a prolific artist for decades before. As a child, she was encouraged by her father, Franz Johnston, a founding member of the Group of Seven, to paint, sketch, craft, and look at the world with imagination and acuity. At the age of 17, Johnston made the decision to pursue an artistic career and got a scholarship to attend the Ontario College of Art in Toronto. It was there that she met fellow art student Franklin Arbuckle, whom she married. Shortly after graduating, Johnston participated in her first exhibition, steadily produced work, undertook commissions, and actively participated in OSA, RCA, and other exhibitions almost every year, establishing herself as a professional artist. I consider Johnston one of Canada's foremost painters of still lifes, flowers, and interiors. However, as a woman working within a patriarchal society, her artistic career has not been as well documented as those of her father and husband. And due to gender, she's been overshadowed in Canadian art history and is relatively unknown. As such, over the past several years, it's become my passion project to recover her story. So within her lifetime, she was branded as the artist's daughter or the artist's wife, and she recalled people often said, "Oh, you're Franz Johnston's daughter. No wonder you can paint." And she would respond as if knowledge of painting could be inherited like blue eyes or dimples. And with this remark, I think she wanted people to know that she worked hard, she was very studious, and she was very passionate about her artistic practice. So unlike her husband, who was designated the main wage earner and was given the best studio spaces, Johnston balanced the role of professional artist with the conventional responsibilities of housekeeping and motherhood. And while living in Montreal, a reviewer once noted that, quote, "The antics of a pair of lively daughters proved to be more hampering to Mr. Arbuckle's production than to his wife. So he has taken a studio downtown across the street from the museum," end quote. So her husband would have had access to art exhibitions, visitors, and a quiet space to work. As scholar Catherine Maston observes, the fact that Johnston's first studio had been in a kitchen is a familiar enough story, also experienced by artists such as Mary Pratt, Joyce Wieland, who were literally dubbed kitchen artists by critics who visited their home studios. So in 1959, Johnston stated, "I got an easel now. For years, I painted on 2 chairs spread with newspaper at night." This improvised way of working is remembered by her daughter, Robin, who would come home on school days for lunch to see her mother clearing the table of a still life arrangement in order to make space to serve her lunch and to eat. So while Johnston began her professional career with a view to becoming a landscape painter, after the birth of her first child, she realized it's not easy to make sketching trips while raising a family. She was quoted as saying, "I'll never forget the first day I thought it was time I stayed home. Archie left for the studio by himself, and I sat looking at the walls and the Chesterfield and the Aspidistras, and I thought, what am I doing here? Instead of landscape, she turned her attention to interiors and domestic subjects instead, and developed an aesthetic style that was distinct from both her father and husband. So there's a very crowded and intimate quality to most of her work, with objects and furniture often overlapping and providing sort of depth. This is evident here in Victorian Sitting Room, one of her early and most often exhibited works. Here, the darkness of the palette reflects a typically somber Victorian space. It's only light source coming through a barrier of plants at the window. Johnston's interiors also incorporate this reoccurring motif of windows and doors that are open, as seen here, which was painted 2 years after the birth of her first child at her father's summer art school on Georgian Bay. And as a critique of the way women artists were regulated to domestic subjects due to sexism and gender bias, this motif of these open windows and doors is symbolic of freedom and alienation within the genre. And it's also seen in the works of contemporaneous women artists like Peggy Nicol MacLeod, Christiane Flug, and Gita Kaiserman. So for this work, an earlier sketch reveals that the dark curtain on the left was a late addition to resolve the composition. The curtain also adds another layer of space and psychological dimension, making the viewer even further removed from the door to the outside world. An extension of her work in interiors, Johnston excelled in her depiction of still lifes, which are her most exhibited and prolific genre. Similar to her interiors, they incorporate bold colors and are crowded with these familiar objects. As noted in an exhibition review, her objects perform like players on a stage. Quote, fruit, flowers, vegetables, and a variety of bowls, vases, and bottles all play their parts, as well as effectively patterned materials, end quote. These paintings are private fictional worlds using her favorite things that are around her and created entirely from her imagination, and they're thus a form of self-portraiture. Johnston also sets each scene with elaborate backdrops. Her love of material is showcased here in a portrait on the left by Emma Hammond, where she's draped herself in a piece of fabric that's reminiscent of some of her backgrounds. So although these fabrics create a private world that extends to the edges of the frame, in this particular work, like I didn't understand this until I found this work in a private collection, you see the offstage secrets here. It's an aesthetic that originated from a lack of studio space. So she would simply drape fabric over chairs or over furniture and paint wherever she could. Johnston used many fabrics for inspiration, but kept returning to this particular piece here. Her daughter Candace brought it home one day and was going to make a dress with it. And then Johnston asked to borrow it and never gave it back. It's very clear, however, why she liked it so much. The design is similar to Henri Matisse's cutouts, and it's one of the many visual tells within her oeuvre that speak to her formal influences. Johnston embraced the emotional qualities of intense Fauves colors and was very inspired by Matisse. And there's other references to Matisse seen throughout her oeuvre, including in this work here. Here she placed the famous first edition of Verve magazine from 1937 on the table, and the illustration cover is by Matisse. This was her diploma work, executed in 1963, just before she gets her studio space. It was deposited at the National Gallery of Canada in recognition of achieving academician status with the Royal Canadian Academy. Her husband had gained this status 20 years earlier. I'd like to suggest that by including this edition of Verve magazine in her painting, she might have been showcasing that she had been an established artist for a long time, had been studying international art movements since the 30s, and it's no mistake what she chooses to place in a lot of her work. So when she finally does get a room of her own in the mid-1960s, after her children are grown, she starts painting her new space repeatedly, calling most of these works chez moi. These paintings are larger in scale, which reflects that she now has more space. And as you can see from this work, she's paying a lot of attention to the studiousness of her room. So books appear in a lot of her works. She was a prodigious reader, and she was, as I said, well-versed in Western art history. If her previous work showed her objects as players on a stage, the paintings of her studio show everything backstage, including her library of props and her backdrops. So seen in this work, actually, pieces of fabric, you can see an inspiration hang along the back wall, and one of which is this green and purple plaid piece, another piece of fabric she returned to quite a bit. And as you can see, it's the background to the work Phlox. So with a studio, her theme of fabric backgrounds starts to expand a bit, and she includes a series of studio corners where patterned rugs and cushions on the floor stand in for a much larger backdrop and stage, as seen in this work here. You could also see another reference to Matisse here, where she's included an illustration of his famous work Dance there on the floor. So her studio also became a place where working was conflated with some of the other activities she conducted in like other areas of her home. So in this work here, à deux chez moi, a napkin hanging off the edge of the table invites viewers to partake in a relaxed and cozy meal in the corner of her studio, indicating that domesticity can coexist in places of work, offering nourishment and discussion. So although there are no figures in any of her work, the crumpled napkin, the rumpled pillows, they're very emblematic of human presence. This is also seen in the work of contemporaneous artist Gita Kaisermer again, where rumpled towels indicate this bodily presence. A studio also allows her to paint subjects a little bit more slowly. So in this work, Johnston has flattened the picture plane with striations to express the movement of light and shadow throughout the day with contrasting bands of color. So this feminist take on cubist concepts could be a comment on the slices of time she found to paint as a working homemaker, but it could also be a celebration of her new studio space where she's able to leave arrangements out for longer periods of time instead of quickly painting them on the kitchen table before the next meal. So I believe that getting and depicting her own studio space was a critical moment in her practice, so much so that in my recent exhibition, A Family Palette, I recreated her studio in the gallery using original artifacts. So this includes her printing press, her easel and paintbrushes and palette, an antique Madonna she often painted, all of her glass bottles and jars, her pedestal bowl that is often recurs in her work, her plants. She was a gardener. She was always bringing plants into her space, this Monstera plant. An original piece of fabric that appears in many of her paintings, including as a rug in this work. A reproduction of the Matisse-inspired fabric. The painting in progress on the easel. And of course, her favorite white jug. So she found beauty and intellectual rigor in applying different formal approaches to familiar subjects every day. And even before she had her own studio space, she was very persistent in making as much room as possible for the development of her practice. Arguably, by the time she gets her own studio, Johnston had already developed a unique aesthetic style that had matured from a particular context of making, though a studio did allow her to produce more work as well as expand on previous ideas. Her home and then her studio were always a welcoming space where she hosted, relaxed with family, gardened, and conducted serious independent work. This was mirrored in her paintings, where she conflated her domestic life, personal interests, and formal experimentation, allowing viewers to enter her private world. Thank you.